Welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast with your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA, who has to cash in his pop bottles just to pay his mortgage. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast. I'm your host, content creator, Johnny FIORICA, 30-year veteran, Rochester, New York Police Department, retired as a detective a few months back, with my trusted co-hosts. First one on deck, David Simpson. David was a legendary street cop, undercover cop, SWAT cop, rounded out his career before he retired in the RPD homicide unit. David, welcome to the pod, brother.
Happy to be here, fellas. Thanks, Jay.
David,
no
I
clap
give you
today.
thumbs up. I give you thumbs up. No clap today. Thumbs up. Like Fonzie.
Hey. Jason Blanchard, next up on the deck, also a legendary street cop, 2.5-decade veteran, Rochester Police Department. Worked on all sides of the Flower City. He worked in Genesee, Clinton Lake. He definitely is the lead hostage negotiator on the RPD hostage team since I left. Self-proclaimed 1994 Hall of Famer, Jason Blanchard. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Johnny. Thrilled to be here, even though David is over there. David, that hat, too much darkness. But I love it. I love it, David. You make everything look good.
Yeah. Well, just so you guys know.
Nothing looks bad on me, Jay.
Before we went live, Jay started to get in Dave's head. Dave did 14 outfit changes before our producer said, "Let's go. We got to do this." So Jason literally has been in Dave's head about it. Dave, you look fantastic, by the way.
David, you look awesome.
No one gets in my head because it's too terrifying to get in my head.
David,
but
you look awesome.
Thank you. I realize this.
Listen, guys, I know that I could talk about his wardrobe, Jason's great lettuce on his head, which is why he never wears hats. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of why we're here. We talked in last couple podcasts, we talk about the 4 crises that are facing law enforcement. Not to argue with anybody, but I don't think anybody that's in our community would deny that these are our top 4 crises right now. We talked about bail reform already. We talked about fentanyl. Tonight, we're going to talk about recruitment. We're going to talk about recruitment both locally and on a state and national level. And then the fourth one, which is going to be a great pod. We're going to record that probably in a couple weeks with Dr. Kim Butler. She's coming on. She already committed. We're so super excited to have her. We're going to talk about the 4th crisis, and that crisis is the mental health of police officers and cops. Tonight we're going to talk about recruitment. We really wanted to have an angle of people, professionals that are doing it. Sergeant Justin Collins from the Rochester, New York Police Department reached out to me, along with Officer Michelle Calderon, 2 good friends of the pod, 2 good friends of ours. We all worked with them. They're going to come on. There was a scheduling conflicts, which is why mostly on the Crime Dawg end, not on their end. But we're going to have them on probably the middle of the summer because tentatively they're going to have a September exam coming up. And they'll be able to plug that. They'll be able to talk about recruitment. Maybe we'll do a mini part 2 to what we're going to talk about tonight. But we got a lot of stuff to cover anyways. We want to talk about recruitment. We want to talk about everything that's going on. So there's huge issues in the recruitment in the law enforcement community. We all know when it started. Everybody knows when the recruitment problem started. 2020. In the year 2020, that's when the anti-cop rhetoric, that's when the defund the police rhetoric came out, and that was the beginning of the end for recruitment for law enforcement. Doesn't matter what community you work for, really. We're going to focus on Rochester, New York. That's where we're from. That's where we do our pod from. However, you could literally throw a blanket over what we're going to say in most of the communities across the nation. Because literally in 2020, the anti-cop and the defund the police rhetoric, it came from activists. It came from all walks of life, people that were anti-cop anyways. I'm not going to mention their little BS acronyms and give them any of our platform time and try to validate them. But they also got support from local, state, national politicians. And now all of a sudden, we got huge issues with recruitment. There's huge issues with recruitment. There's big issues with trying to get people and encourage them to become cops. And that's a huge problem. 20 years ago, we could talk about that in the next segment, but we're going to talk about what it was like with recruitment for us in the next segment, David. But literally, there's a problem right now, brother, right? There's a problem with our recruitment in America right now.
Sure there is. And you hit it right on the head. These so-called activists, they went so over the top in bashing the law enforcement and the police officer profession. And it literally has driven the number of people that want to be cops or that are cops that left. That was one of the factors that made me want to leave. But the numbers of people taking the tests are so down because of that rhetoric. And it was so over the top. And when you think about it, what other profession, all cops are bad. It was like a blanket statements, these things, the police are bad. It went so far as kill the police and calling us pigs and all that stuff. What other profession is out there? If a doctor has malpractice, are all doctors vilified? No. If a lawyer commits fraud or tax evasion or is incompetent, are all lawyers bad? No, of course not. You can go down and down the list of professions. If a politician is dirty, are all politicians dirty? No. But when it came to cops and when it comes to cops and police officers and law enforcement, if one person does something improper, and it's going to happen, mistakes are made, the whole profession is vilified and was vilified. And that's where it went over the line and over the top, such to extremes that it made those that thought the profession would be an honorable way to make a living, they looked the other way and said, you know what? I don't know if I want to deal with that. And there's a direct result. And I always ask the question, why would they do that about law enforcement? And it doesn't happen with any other walk of life, any other profession.
Yeah, you hit it right on the dot, Jay. Just to piggyback on that, our best bud, Teddy Caridi, the silent assassin, he's been up in our background unit forever. And he's been doing a great job, keeping the people that should not be cops off and also helping our recruitment out for decades and bringing in the people that should be cops. Teddy's a great barometer for our department because he has so much experience in that unit. No matter what a great guy like Teddy Caridi does, or people like Michelle Calderon, because she's all over the map. I mean, she's at festivals and she's at recruitment job bazaars. She's everywhere, college campuses. But when you have a couple great people in our unit in Rochester, New York, in our recruitment area, in our backgrounds, even you have great people that it's just tough to get people to take that exam anymore.
Well, yeah, you're 100% right. And based on the numbers, right? Numbers don't lie. So like the test that I took, I think it was in 98 or 99, they had 5,800 people take that test. And I got hired in 2000 and our class had, I think, 34 recruits, right? So you're picking out of 5,800, right? To start the process. Now we all know how they wash out along the way with PT and psychologicals and backgrounds and so on and so forth, right? But if you start with a big pool and a big number, you're drawn, with a much larger applicant base, right? And Rochester isn't unique to this. This is a nationwide problem. They're not getting recruits on a nationwide level. And, we've talked about this, that the profession itself has, in some circles, been portrayed as not an honorable profession, right? I strongly disagree with that. I think we all do. But it's, when you paint the men and women in this profession in a negative light, on national nude shows and newspapers and talk radio or whatever it may be, right? People then say, why would I want to go do that job when I could do something else and probably make as much money and not be up on the radar in the crosshairs of people and micromanaged and second guessed for everything that I do in a split second decision, and down the line, you're micromanaged and second guessed. Personally, this is something that I always wanted to do. And that's what I went to school for. You don't certainly need a 4-year degree to be a police officer, right? But that's the route that I took. And I don't regret any of my decisions. I'm still here, right? I still love what I do. I still have zero problem coming to work every day. Not only is the recruitment the issue, right, which is a huge one, the retention is a bigger issue. David walked out the door with 20 in a day. and told you why. You stayed 30, but you now, Johnny, I group us into kind of the same generation of police officers. You're probably the exception now. I don't think guys are doing 30. When we came on, guys said 30 without thinking about it, right? Now I think 20, people are saying, I've had enough, or 25, but not many guys in their heads are saying, I'm going to do 30, right? I'm going to do 30 and see what happens. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, you talk numbers, Jay, and I had that for the second part of this. We talked about, and you talk about people in our generation, the sliding scale, and I talked, to you and to Teddy and to a whole bunch of people over the years. The number ran anywhere from 4,000 or 5,000 to 10,000 that took the exam, and then you were fighting for 25 spots out of all those thousands of people, 40 spots maybe. There was an anomaly when I got hired in 93. It was an anomaly. It never happened before. It won't happen again. They took actually 3 police academy recruit classes off of 1 exam. I was the very last class, thank God. And I scored a 94 on the test. Public record, so it's not anything. And that wasn't good enough for me to get in the first 2 classes. Thanks, Danny. But, the thing is, though, is, I scored a 94. I got boxed out of the first 2 classes. So basically, the people that they took from the classes before were scoring hundreds and higher 90s than mine. And that was the competitiveness, right? I don't say that because I'm not bragging. I mean, I scored a 94, almost didn't get called. So,
Johnny, Johnny, in your academic career, a 94 is the highest you've ever scored in anything. I mean, let's be honest.
Jason, I wish I could defend that, but I can't. I did get a 520 on my SAT if you want to bury me in the dirt academically anymore. However, you're 100% right. I never got a 94 on anything, But I will tell you, though, that what has happened now, because they're running into issues with bringing people on, what's going on now is we're having an issue grabbing people to say, hey, you want to take the test? For example, there might be 1,000 people that sign up for the test and say, yeah, we want to come and take the test. You end up getting like almost half not even showing up. So now you're down to 500. I mean, you're literally dealing with hundreds of people when in fact, years ago, you're dealing with thousands. You're taking the cream of the crop, right? So now that leaves these hiring agencies, these municipalities, I don't agree with it, but they're starting to lower their standards, taking people that normally would not have gotten hired by a police department. They're now lowering the standards. And this isn't the fault of any of our boys and girls, our brothers and sisters. They're just being told this is what the standards are. Our brothers and sisters ain't making the standards. They're being told what the standards are. So, for example, just so you know, we're not blowing smoke. Here's the deal, right? We shoot it down the middle like we talked about all the time. Criminal histories, if you have a criminal history and we came on, you ain't getting on. If you had a traffic ticket, chances are you weren't getting on. That's how tough the competition was. Now, what I say by lowering the standards, you can have a criminal history. You can have a petty larceny, for example, a misdemeanor, a misdemeanor. You worked it off through community service, but everything shows up in your background, may not have a record anymore, but you can have a criminal arrest that you got convicted of or pled to. And now they're hiring those people. Now they're making excuses, right? Oh, well, that petty larceny happened when they were in college. They got dared by their frat or sorority sisters to steal some beer. They're over now. So literally municipalities are literally making up excuses now so they can justify lowering the standards for some of these people that they're hiring. Another example, right? Because I don't want you to think I'm just talking out of my ass here. Here's the thing. The psych exam, right? The psych exam was a huge component. You sat there across from a legitimate psychiatrist who psychologically evaluated you after you filled out a gazillionaire questionnaire. It was hundreds and hundreds of questions. Then you sat down, you got interviewed by the guy or the woman and the doctor, and the psychiatrist psychologically evaluated you. And there's three grades to come out of that psych exam, right? So you got recommended, which is 1, recommended with reservations, which is 2, or not recommended. In our generation, it was the first one or nothing.
Right.
The first one or nothing. You were recommended or you weren't. Now what we're seeing, again, lowering the standards. I'm giving you a couple more examples. we have recommended with reservations, which means the psychiatrist is seeing something they don't necessarily like in this academy recruit, right? But again, the municipalities, they're forcing our boys and girls to now lower the standards and hire people that they normally wouldn't hire because they don't have a big pot to choose from anymore. Another example is drug abuse or drug use. Our generation, you don't have a shot of getting on. Maybe marijuana, because if you look at any psychological adolescent handbook or read a book, I mean, you'll see that over 90-something% of kids at least tried marijuana once. Even in our generation, that really wasn't a let's knock this kid out of the box kind of a thing. However, lowering the standards, now you got kids that say, oh, well, I sold a little bit of weed when I was in high school. And now you got municipalities going, well, he sold it. If you really look into it, we interviewed him and what they said was, well, he was just selling to like his friends. It's just a friend group that he was selling weed to. What? Look here's the thing. You're not getting the cream of the crop anymore. You're not getting the cream of the crop. Now, I'm not saying this. I'm sure there is a couple people in every class that would have made in our generation. I'm not saying that we're the all being and we're all great. I'm not saying that. However, I'm just saying that by lowering the standards, you're going to get a lower quality cop coming in there to serve the community. What does that mean to the community? I'll tell you what that means. You're going to possibly have future personnel issues, right? Calling in sick, not taking jobs, being lazy, showing up to work, not on time. Those are personnel issues. Or what it might morph into is you're picking from the lower barrel or the bottom of the barrel now. Guess what might happen? Well, I got this guy with $100 in his pocket. Maybe I turn in, $50. I got this guy with 10 bags of Coke. Maybe I turn in 3 bags of Coke. This is what happens when you lower hiring standards. I hate to say it. I'm not being a drama queen. I'm not doing that at all. But then what you'll see, here's what you're going to see. David, you're going to see the same anti-cop, defund the police people when they cause this hiring to happen because of their rhetoric. Now they'll be the same ones that come on the news and go, look at these dirty cops. Look at these dirty cops. They're horrible. Well, little do they know, 4 or 5 years ago when you started the anti-cop, this is the people that we had to choose from. And now here we got our recruitment backgrounds in recruitment. We have them trying to take from a pot of people that aren't qualified. And now these same people, the local, state, national politicians, be like, oh, these dirty cops. Well, yeah, this is who we choose. They're not the cream of the crop anymore, David.
Yeah, and it's like these activists and these politicians miss the whole cause and effect. It's like they miss early math, 1 + 1 is 2, or they play checkers. I don't know what you want to say about it, but they don't realize when you bash the hell out of a profession and make it so no one wants to be a cop, there's fallout from that. And the fallout is you get less qualified candidates, less people that want to do the job. Then you have an influx of people want to leave the job. And then the third cause and effect that happens is then you have to pay those that work a lot more in overtime, and you're going to have cops making $200,000-$300,000 a year because you ran a bunch of people off the job and you can't get new ones on the job. They didn't realize that, hey, if we do this, what's going to be the fallout from this? So again, it's not taking, and I think we always pride ourselves on being middle of the road, but it's not taking an incident and examining it and talking about it and trying to improve the profession. I think we've all talked about that mistakes have happened in law enforcement, of course, and they will continue to happen. But it's the broad brush, it's hammering police as a profession in law enforcement collectively, from whether it be the activists, to the politicians, that blankets the whole profession, that drives down these things, these numbers, and causes the people to leave. And then the salaries are going to go up because you got to pay these guys to work double shifts every day of their life. Because who else is going to police the city?
David, I don't mean to step on your thought,
No,
David,
go
but
ahead.
I was just going to say, we talk about the officers now and the detectives and the sergeants that are making, $200,000 and $300,000, and those aren't exaggerated numbers, right? That's legitimate work, but that has to be done, right? Those guys
100%.
and girls aren't sitting on their couches at home making that money. You know what they're
That's
doing?
blood money.
You got it. So it's time away from their families. It's time
100%.
away from cookouts, from weddings, from holidays, from you name it, right? That these guys are going to work north of 1,000 hours of overtime in a year, right? To offset the shortages.
Right. They have no life.
And then they're vilified for making X amount of dollars.
Right.
So they step up, they do what they're supposed to do, they help out, they run personnel shortages, they whatever the case may be, and they're beat up by saying, well, you made this much money.
You made too much money.
And let's not also forget, right, that Johnny, as you mentioned, when this all started, the RPD, right, we were without a contract for our union. So our wages didn't increase for a substantial period of time until that contract was settled with the city, and it did get settled, right? But when that happened, those guys and girls were working when the defund narrative happened, COVID on the heels from that, when half of the world worked from home. You know who didn't work from home? You know who came to work every day and answered calls for services and went into houses with COVID and masks and this and that and worked through an epidemic? The men and women in law enforcement did that, right? All over the country and worked through an epidemic. There was no working from home. That didn't happen.
No, you're 100% right. And it's funny because our producer, Dan always says, guys, try that on a positive note. Try that on a positive note. And the thing is we're trying. With this topic, it's very difficult, Danny. We're trying. We're seeing, to be positive, we're seeing a little bit change in the rhetoric, right? From local, state, and national politicians now. They're trying to tamper down the anti-police, the defund the police rhetoric.
Election year.
Yeah, right. But again, what do I say? And what have I said in the past podcast? I talk about the Mrs. Johnson effect, right? The fictitious woman who lives in the inner city, the depressed neighborhood that I dealt with, a Mrs. Johnson 30 years of my career, right? She's the one, her family's the one. They're the ones that are going to suffer from this. Because at the end of the day, when you have the inability, like our background in recruitment units all over the country, when you have the inability to hire people and you have personnel shortages like Jay was talking about, and Dave was talking about having to hire overtime, you have personnel shortages now. You have less cops in the neighborhood. You have less cops responding to calls, less cops that are physically visible in a neighborhood as a deterrent for crime to happen. So the Mrs. Johnsons and the families of their neighborhoods that live in these places, they're the ones who directly are impacted by this. In addition to all the less cops being in the neighborhoods, I remember before I retired, they were talking about, oh, well, we don't have that many cops, right? Well, we might have to not take B calls, right? A B call is just a non-priority call. Maybe we just send them and have them call a cop and talk to them on the phone and get a report, right? Back in the day, a B call was, Mrs. Johnson got her plant stolen off her front porch. She needed a report for it. Cool. We go to her house. We give Mrs. Johnson a report. It was a B job. Priority 1 jobs, A jobs, in progress jobs, violent domestics. Those are the ones that you got to send the cops to, right? Because you got to save lives. But even those calls, there's sometimes not enough cops. And now you got national ambulance. I'm dating myself, but you got AMR, you got ambulances, but you have the ambulance crews now set up hundreds of yards from his house. Like, hello, 911. Are the cops coming? Are the cops
tomorrow?
Yeah, because you don't have it. It's not cops being lazy, but if you have a pizza and that pizza, you can carve it into 4 pieces or 100 pieces. That's the city of Rochester, and that's any municipality in America. The area geographically that cops patrol is only so big, and there's only so many cops to do it. And when you don't have enough cops, I'll give you an example. Probably about anywhere from 13 to 15 years ago, my mind's going now, but I mean, we had you guys will remember, we had like over 750 cops in the RPD back in the day. That was at its height. That was the most I had ever seen in my entire 30-year career. 750, 770, whatever the number was, right? Now, I don't even know. We're down in the 600s, Jay, So now here's what we're doing. We're looking at cops who are working overtime, killing themselves, like you're saying, Jay. And now they're talking about, oh, well, we could just do priority 1 jobs. There's just not enough cops to go around, right? I mean, you work the streets, right, Jay? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Well, so over the last 3 years, personnel shortage and stuff, I worked a bunch, right? I worked a bunch of overtime. And I worked it with primarily one of the guys from our generation because, we kind of run in packs, right? We know how guys are going to respond and react. We came on together, and I'm talking about Officer Brian Kayla, right? We've said this before. Brian's a bulldog. Brian was Officer of the Year for the city of Rochester, a few years back. And, if something happens, this is the guy you want showing up on a job. And it's certainly the guy that I wanted to take jobs with for 24 plus months working on 3rd Platoon. And we did. And we worked a ton of doubles and we worked them. And, the shortages were there. It wasn't like we were just plug and play. These shortages existed. And we worked primarily over in the East Side and Goodman section. And more importantly is what we talked about. The recruitment process is huge. We all understand that because you're bringing somebody in the door for hopefully the next 20 years. But the retention process is just as important because when you see a guy walk out the door, an officer who retires, he or she is taking that 20 plus years of experience with them out the door. That's, an intangible that you can't measure. And when we lose 5, 6, 7, 8 officers in 3 or 4 months, there's 100, 120 years plus of experience in service in the city of Rochester. And that's a tough number to replace. So you can bring somebody in the door, but to get them to the level where they're as proficient and as efficient as those guys and girls walking out the door takes years, right? Just learning the streets in the city of Rochester, right? You ran around lost for the first 6 months. Now everybody's got an iPhone and they punch in the address and they know where the hell they're going. But it's, not being able to retain for the reasons we've all listed is a big hurdle for not just the RPD, but for departments all over the country to get the men and women to stay a second longer than they have to and incentivize it to keep them.
Yeah, I'll tell you, shout out to Brian Kale, legendary RPD street cop. I know you ran with him for a couple of years on all those shifts.
Who by the way, is retiring this year, right?
Yeah, he's retiring. Teddy Critty, star recruit. But Brian Kayla, I saw on social media, great acquisition by Todd Baxter and MCSO. Looks like they're going to pick up Brian. That was a great acquisition on their part. You got guys like Brian Kayla. You got guys like Sammy Genovese. You got Danny Cleary. You got legendary street cops. And every municipality has the guys like a Kayla, like a Sammy Genovese and a Danny Cleary, legendary street cops. That you're right, Jay. The retention; those are the guys that are eventually going to leave with that institutional knowledge. David, that institutional knowledge goes a long way, don't it, brother?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I try to think about it like a football team. Like you have your offensive line. Let's say you have 2 all-pros on the offensive line that are older players, but they're seasoned vets, like a Jason Kelsey with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's going to retire as a center. You could go spend a first-round draft pick and draft someone in the first round, and he could be a total stud coming in. But I guarantee you he's not going to be as productive as Jason Kelsey was at the end of his career because there's just something with the experience of the reps and the snaps and being in the arena, and it takes time to get there. Very few people walk right in and are able to be proficient at a job, and law enforcement's no different. You might have the body to check a box and say, okay, our numbers went up by 30 or 25. But the experience that goes out that door, guys that have training in vast number of different things, narcotics or SWAT or whatever, they're investigators. To get someone to replace that and you bring an officer in, to the general public, you're literally bringing in a 7th rounder to replace a Hall of Famer. Like that's the equivalent. And you're going to have to build that cop up to be a Hall of Famer over a decade or 2 decades to make it a true replacement. That's what people miss. It's not just a number.
And the difference, David, is, and we were all the young guys, right? We Johnny, I just talked about Dave Blayo and Gary Gletta, right? I ran into those guys, and you know, they were the generation above us, right? But
like 3 generations for those guys above us. Jesus, they're like 108.
The difference now is that men and women are leaving this profession in droves. They didn't leave. Those guys, Galetta and Blaho, did north of 30 years. Well north of 30 years, right? And that is the difference.
They built the PSB around them.
The difference now is that guys are doing 20 in a day and they're leaving. And that's David, there you go, right? And that's what you have to kind of figure out along the way as well, is how do we retain them? How do we retain those people?
Yeah, you're right, guys. Good talk. I mean, yeah, shout out to Blaho and G, Gary Galetta, two legendary street detectives with us, both retired out of our murder unit. They're fantastic, just like the other guys.
Blaho's my old partner.
Yeah, they're great guys, man. And you know, the thing is this is just a short conversation, right? It's a 30-minute conversation, 30-minute dialogue with people that actually know what's going on out there. And we hope you liked it. If you did like it, hit the thumbs up, hit subscribe. If you like it, please go to the crimedawgpodcast.com. There's a little button over there that says feedback. Get your feedback in. You could also leave us a audio or a video of yourself. If you got any questions or concerns or topics that you want to hear, we hope to oblige you. Listen, we want you to subscribe too, because we're doing a live broadcast. We don't know. It's going to be sometime beginning or end of the summer. We're doing a live broadcast to be determined. We don't know the date yet. We don't know the location yet. But if you subscribe, we're actually going to do a random drawing from the people that subscribe, that are legitimate subscribers. We're taking names randomly from that to invite them to our live broadcast of one of our pods. So we hope you subscribe. We hope you like our stuff. We got a lot of things to talk about in future episodes. We hope you join us. But like my brother-in-law, Frankie Grassi, says, if you can't make it, who cares?